The brilliant desert colors of the great Southwest. You know, our native landscapes are spectacular sanctuaries for local plants and animals. However, with our great vistas come certain responsibilities. One of these is the preservation of our water supplies, both under and above the ground. Water truly is the Middle Rio Grande Valley's lifeblood, and it is steadily being drained in part by large expanses of cool season grasses like Kentucky bluegrass and other thirsty plants that require exorbitant amounts of water just to survive in our high desert environment. Landscapes in Albuquerque receive some 9 billion gallons of water between March and October, comprising nearly half of our water use during the growing season. By altering our landscapes to use more native and adapted drought-tolerant plants and using drip irrigation to apply water exactly when and where it is needed, we can save millions of gallons of water every year.
Drip irrigation systems are in the 90 to 95% range of irrigation efficiency, providing you operate them correctly, as compared to an overhead system, which on a residential system is going to be hanging around 50 or 60% probably.
Now, drip irrigation offers us a lot of advantages because we can irrigate a number of different plants on the same valve just by adding more or less emitters depending on the size of the plant. Also, it applies water in a specific point so we don't irrigate large areas of ground that encourages weed germination, which again just sucks up the water.
If you plan to add new plants to your landscape, consider native and adapted drought-tolerant plants that can add explosive color and warm texture to your yard.
The advantage of a xeriscape is those plants want to live here, so they're at least meeting you halfway. Where if you're gardening with plants that really don't belong in this climate, they're fighting you every inch of the way.
The more native plants you have, the more tolerant they are of the local weather conditions, so they probably don't need to be irrigated. Just like any mature plant that's native to the area doesn't need to be irrigated. It might need to be irrigated just for establishment, but after the first few years, there's no need to water it.
Drip systems work great for almost all plants. The technology enables you to pinpoint water applications for desert accents and succulents, flowers and flowering ground covers, ornamental grasses, and shrubs and trees. Although a drip system applies water at very low volumes, efficiency is still important. Adjust your watering times as seasonal weather changes, at least monthly, and turn it off after a good rain.
Just the changing of irrigation schedules for drip or for spray heads or sprinklers, is really dictated by the weather. And as the weather changes, we need to go out and reevaluate our irrigation needs. Really, the homeowner is the key to operating the system correctly.
If you're adding drip irrigation to an existing sprinkler system or converting sprinkler zones into drip zones, you'll need to use valves designed and intended for very low volume applications. Buy as many drip valves as the size of your yard requires. One may be enough. Check your backflow prevention devices and your piping to ensure that they are still operational in drip applications.
You're going to change your landscape, and that means changing your irrigation system. And one of the things we want to do to make it most cost effective is look at all the equipment that you've already got in the landscape, from the valves, the backflow preventers, the piping, any sprinkler devices that might still be usable, and determine which of those can be reused and which have to be replaced.
Get out in your yard and decide what exactly it is that you wish to accomplish. If you're changing or adding plants, visit some local nurseries and learn about plants and their characteristics, how much water they require, when they bloom, how much sunlight they need, how large they are when they mature, how much to prune them, and what maintenance should be considered. Use the city's free xeriscape guide or take advantage of local seminars and clubs that are available to you. Scratch around in the dirt. The way your soil holds water is important for the plants you select. For sand or clay-based soils, use more but smaller emitters placed at equal distances around the perimeter of the plant's foliage. This way, more of the root zone can utilize the water. Also, during your site evaluation, look for areas in your yard that share a common exposure to sun, shade, wind, and runoff from your roof. Ask the city for a free rainwater harvesting guide. All of these factors affect how you can design hydro zones where plants with similar water needs share an irrigation valve.
You have what's called microclimates. You'll have a warm spot, you'll have a cool spot, you'll have a shady spot, and we will utilize those microclimates to the plant advantage.
Automatic drip systems are comprised of a controller used to activate irrigations at programmable times, durations, and days. The controller is hardwired to electric valves in the landscape. When your program tells the controller it's time to water, an electronic signal is transmitted from the controller to each valve or zone, thus opening the valve and enabling irrigation water to enter the pipe and exit emitters placed around the plants. Drip irrigation is an engineered science. A properly designed and installed drip system should last for decades.
You don't want to mix spray heads with drip systems on the same valve. You want to be sure that each valve has only one type of irrigation device, be it drip, spray head, or rotor.
A normal residential system might have 6 to 10 zones, where the lawns would be hopefully separate from the shrubs, which would be separate from the flowers. The sun areas would be zoned separately from the shade areas. The high water use plants would be zoned separately from the low water use plants, so you can get more precise in how you water.
Call nurseries and irrigation distributors for guides and manuals that can help. Ask them questions. They're more than willing to offer suggestions.
If you've selected to do your own project, it may be worthwhile to get some specialized tools to make the job a little easier. One of the tools that I think is essential is a pipe cutter. The nice thing about these devices is that with very little effort it makes a nice clean cut that can be inserted directly into a fitting. If you use a hacksaw, it often leaves a burr around here that needs to be cleaned off before the fitting goes on. Trenching shovels. 4-inch trenching shovel is the same width as a trench. A grade rake is also useful. There's a very lightweight rake. It's broader than a standard rake. A digging bar. Extremely heavy, but useful for breaking out concrete, removing boulders, chopping away at the ends of trenches. And lastly, a tamping device, which is basically just a big heavy foot for tamping the soil back into the trenches. You may or may not need a device like this. Those are some of the optional tools, and these are going to be some of the essentials in your project. You're going to need primer for every PVC weld. You put this on, and then you're going to put on your PVC solvent. We've got some pipe threading compound that's good for threaded fittings. We also have Teflon tape. You can use whichever one you prefer. Be careful not to apply this to any fittings that say not to use dope. Sometimes the fittings are marked. You're going to need your valves, your backflow prevention device. For a drip project, you're definitely going to need a filter and a pressure regulating device. This one's 20 psi, usually 20 to 30 psi is appropriate. You're going to need some kind of a valve box, both for your valves, but also sometimes some of the other components go into a smaller valve box. It really depends on the layout that you want. You're also going to need a variety of fittings, parts, and pieces. The best way to make up your parts list is to sit down with your plan and go through zone by zone, listing the items that you need and how many you need. And once you have that checklist, you can head out to the store. When you get to the store, it's always wise to buy 10 to 20% more of these fittings than you think you'll actually need, and that can save you a trip. There are various kinds of hydrants. The hydrant can be the regulating device, telling how much water is allowed to pass through to each plant. And in some cases, they'll be color-coded, and each of these devices will receive the same amount of water. On other varieties of hydrants, you may have the option of choosing which port is allowed which amount of water. And so in this particular instance, we could replace some of these emitter devices to allow different amounts of water to flow through each of these ports on the base. Another preference issue is whether you want these hydrants exposed in the landscape or contained in some kind of a valve cover, a protective box. These boxes can be put in level with the landscape and give you access to this device, and also keep it protected from vandalism and accidental stumbling and just basically having something sticking up out of your new landscape design. So that's a personal choice. It works fine either way. The hydrant is one way to regulate the water flow. Another way is through the use of emitters. Emitters are small devices that tell the system how much water is allowed to pass through, and they generally start at about 1/2 gallon per hour, 1 gallon per hour, 2 gallons per hour, and the flow rates go up from there. You might notice most of the manufacturers color code them to make it easy to know what the gallonage is that's coming out of each of the emitters. You can put as much water on a plant as you feel is necessary using large emitters or a whole complex of emitters. Most of the emitters now are pressure compensating emitters, meaning they'll put out about the same amount of water no matter what the pressure is in the system, and I strongly recommend that you only use pressure compensating emitters. When you use emitters like this, you're usually using a 1/2-inch distribution tube. This flexible hose can be put anywhere in the landscape, snaked around and put underneath the mulch cover so it's out of exposed view. These devices are pretty simple. This one happens to be a self-piercing emitter. Everywhere that you decide you want water to come out of this, simply push it into the pipe. There, it's installed. And then from here we can attach our distribution tubing to the plant. Some other emitters that have found a large following are these flag type emitters. One nice thing about these is that these emitters can be taken apart and flushed out. So if for any reason your filter doesn't catch a contaminant and it comes and clogs this emitter can be taken apart, flushed out, put back together again. There are also varieties of what are called inline emitters, where the tubing goes into the emitter and then out the other side, and you can put as many of these emitters in line as are needed around a plant. Your controller can seem like one of the more confounding pieces of equipment on your irrigation system. Buy a digital timer, one that waters down to the precise minute. Look for multiple independent programs that allow spray irrigation, drip irrigation, bubblers, different types of systems to water on different schedules. This also has multiple run times. It can run 3 separate times on any given run day. Many timers that you can choose from. Make sure you get something that you feel comfortable with.
There's no great mystery to drip irrigation. It's pretty straightforward to install. It takes very simple tools, typically a punch to punch a hole in the tubing and to press an emitter in. From the standpoint of design, again, you need to look at what you're irrigating, the type and size of plant material. It's good to know a little bit about what its water requirements are and how those water requirements are in relation to other plants that are being irrigated by the same line. But I think that anybody who has basic skills with their hands and some tools should be able to install the system without any problem.
Probably the most important part about installation is zoning it correctly and giving you a clock that allows you to manage those areas differently. If the clock doesn't allow that, there's no use even installing it that way. You want to just make sure it's a proper installation, that your pipes are deep enough, that you're using products that have a warranty and that are well known. There are products out there that are very rarely used in the irrigation business. You're probably not want to use that type of product. You want to use the mainstream products that are easily replaceable by you if possible, and don't have a long life to them or a good warranty.
Be patient with your installation, ensuring that trenching, gluing, wiring, and even backfilling the trenches are done correctly and completely. Putting the system together offers you greater insight about how the system works and how to make repairs later.
Before you start trenching and do your layout, it's important that you call for the location of all the utilities. Most utilities will be out within a day or two to mark the location of underground electrical lines, gas lines, telephone lines, and cable TV lines. So this is our main point of connection. Coming across, we have an isolation valve in the manifold, and then we've got 3 zone valves, each with a backflow preventer. Our control wire essentially travels an undesirable route across the roof eave, so we'd like to change that. And we also notice that the control wire is using unprotected wire nuts. Rather than risk the whole project, I think what we want to do is rebuild the valve manifold, move it to another location a little bit more out of the way.